Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Your Bible Questions Answered. Today, we're going to look at the question, what is Palm Sunday? Palm Sunday, as we're going to find out, is the first day of Holy Week. It is the day where Jesus Christ, for the first time, allowed himself to be worshiped as he publicly, for the first time, revealed himself to be Israel's promised Messiah. So it's a very, very important day as it begins Holy Week, which ended, of course, with the crucifixion on Friday and the resurrection on Sunday. All right, the information we have here is going to be from our book on Matthew. You can find it on our website, Educating Our World, under the heading of Jesus Christ, where we have a verse by verse commentary in the entire Gospel of Matthew. And of course, as all our material is, it's a free download. All right, what's going on here? Jesus comes to Jerusalem. This is the final destination of his public ministry, and his entry into Jerusalem will show that he is a king of a different order than the people had expected. They were expected a king to come and clobber the Romans and set up God's kingdom right there. Well, Jesus is a king of a different kind, as they're going to find out. So, verse 1 in chapter 21 says, "And when they had approached Jerusalem and came to Bethpage, at the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent two disciples." All right, they're approaching Jerusalem. They came from Jericho. It's a 17-mile walk from Jerusalem to Jerusalem from Jericho, but it's uphill all the way. Jericho is below sea level. Jerusalem's about 2,600 feet above sea level. So they've got about 3,000 feet marching up to finally get to the city of Jerusalem. The road passes through Bethany and near Bethpage, which is called the House of Figs. It lays on the southeast side of the Mount of Olives. These cities are named to inform the reader that Jesus is approaching the city of Jerusalem. Now, the Mount of Olives is very important in biblical history. First of all, it's the place, according to Zechariah 14:4 in the past, that Zechariah predicted the Messiah would come and put his feet on the Mount of Olives. Then later in Jesus' ministry, after his death and resurrection, the day of his ascension in Acts chapter 1, he was on the Mount of Olives and he ascended from there. And when the disciples were looking up, you recall, the angel said, "What are you looking up, men of Galilee? The same Jesus who left here is going to come back to the exact same place." So the Mount of Olives is very significant in biblical history, in past, present, and future, of course. So it's where he's going to physically return to earth. So anyway, he sends two unnamed disciples to prepare for what's about to happen. And he says, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately you'll find a donkey tied there and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me." Now, he's purposely preparing to enter Jerusalem in the fulfillment of Zechariah 9:9, which talks about the Messiah sitting on a donkey and coming meek and lowly to the people. Now, he knows there's going to be a donkey tied there. Why? Because he is the Lord of all and he knows all things. Now, colts that had not been written sometimes accompany their mothers, and that's what they're going to find, a colt and a donkey. Untie them both and bring them to him, Jesus said. Now, what he is doing, he is exercising the prerogative of royalty. Kings had the right of impressing or commandeering an animal, just as the Lord has the right to do whatever he wants to with his own subjects, whether they be his disciples or not. All things belong to him, so he's going to want his donkey and his colt to come to him. So he arranges for the ride on the colt. This was a deliberate act of revealing himself to those who had eyes to see and ears to hear. No longer would his identity be kept secret. Now the world's going to know exactly who he is. In verse 3 of chapter 21, it says, "And if anyone says anything to you, you say, 'Their Lord has need of them,' and immediately he will send them." All right, this is how you're going to respond in case you get a question. Their Lord, refers basically to Jesus in this context. He is Yahweh, the Lord. The Greek word kurios, translated Lord, sometimes just means master or sir, but sometimes it's used for the divine name, the four Hebrew consonants that refer to Yahweh or Jehovah, the divine name. And this is what he's referring to. Tell him the Lord, Jehovah, Yahweh, has need of them. And he said, and immediately they're going to send them. In other words, he correctly predicts the outcome ahead of time. You just ask and say you need it, untie it, and immediately it's going to take place this way. Now, we're told this is a fulfillment, Matthew 21:4, to that which was spoken through the prophet. Now, in the Greek text, there's a variant reading there. And a variant reading means some manuscripts read different here. Instead of the prophet, some manuscripts read Isaiah the prophet. Okay, this took place to fulfill, and these might be the words of Jesus rather than Matthew. The first part of what was spoken is from Isaiah 62:11, and the rest from Zechariah 9:9, what's about to be fulfilled. Here's what it says, Matthew 21:5. Say to the daughter of Zion, Behold, your king is coming to you, gentle and mounted upon a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Okay, so to say to the daughter of Zion, Behold your king. All right, very clear. This is the fulfillment. Jesus is indeed the king. Now notice he's coming to them gentle and mounted upon a donkey. He is a meek, humble king, not a warrior-like king. Officials use donkeys for civil, not military processions. So this is very important. He's not riding on a horse, he's riding on a donkey. He'll be riding on a horse at his second coming. Therefore, this was not the triumphal entry in the sense of a Roman triumph. It was triumphant, all right, but the Lord Jesus comes as a meek and peaceful king coming to his subjects, his definition of what sort of king he really was. Verse 6 says, and the disciples went away and did just as Jesus directed them. All right, this now is peaceful entry is now set in motion. And it says they brought the donkey and the colt, placed their cloaks on them, and he sat upon them. Okay, so they bring the donkey and the colts and place their cloaks upon them, and he sat upon them. Some people mistakenly think he sat upon both the donkey and the colt at the same time, straddling both. No, when he said he sat upon them, he sat upon the garments that were there, not both animals at the same time. All right, then we read in verse 8, and the great crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and others were cutting down branches from the trees and spreading them in the road. All right, they're making the way for the king. The cutting down of branches was very appropriate for this setting. John 12:13 mentions they cut down palm branches, hence the name Palm Sunday. Palm branches were normally used for the Feast of Tabernacles or for triumphal entries, which this was. Consequently, the fact that Jesus was riding on a donkey showed that he was not the revolutionary king that they expected. He's not going to fulfill the aspirations of the people at this time at his first coming. That is going to be when he returns again. So they spread them in the road. In other words, they're spreading their garments in the road, the people were. And this is acknowledging Jesus' kingship. In the midst of the noise of the crowd, Jesus rides the unbroken animal. As Matthew has already emphasized, Jesus is Lord over nature. And that's from Matthew 8:23 to 27. Now, as the crowd and the crowd that was going ahead of him and one's following behind, so you got a crowd before and a crowd after, were crying out, Hosanna, save now to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest. So the crowd is leading the procession, they're following the procession. Hosanna means save now, save now. It's basically a cry, you're the Messiah, save us now, to the Son of David. Now, unfortunately, they didn't grasp the meaning of the term. Son of David is the Messiah, and this is the exact term. That's what they're saying. But sadly, as the great crowd is not going to keep up with this idea as the week proceeds. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest. They do acknowledge him as the Messiah, and he accepts their worship. However, he will not entrust himself to them. In John chapter 2, verses 23 to 25, it says Jesus knew what was in their heart, and he wouldn't entrust himself to these people, even though they were saying outwardly he is the Messiah. He knew that this same crowd a few days later would shout, Crucify, crucify. All right, so he enters Jerusalem. The whole city was shaken. Who is this? All right, the same phrase is used of Jerusalem when the wise men came at the birth of Jesus in Matthew 2:3. So the whole city was shaken when they heard of his birth. Now the whole city is shaken when he comes for the first time and publicly reveals himself as the Messiah, the child that was born in Bethlehem some 30 odd years before, now returns to the city of Jerusalem as the promised Messiah. They want to know the identity of this person they're acknowledging. Jerusalem did not know its king, and that's the sad thing. And the crowd was saying, This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee. All right, it's not a complete description of Jesus. He's more than a prophet. He was a prophet, a spokesman from God, but he's actually the Messiah. It was possible that the Galilean crowd explained it to the others who Jesus was. Now, the religious leaders were told from Luke's gospel, wanted Jesus to rebuke the crowds for what they were saying. In Luke 19:39 to 40, it says, But some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. I tell you, he answered, if they remain silent, the very stones will cry out. Luke 19:39 to 40. Then Luke tells us that he wept over the city after his entrance on Palm Sunday. As Jesus approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it. If only you had known on this day what would bring you peace. But now it is hidden from your eyes, for the days will come upon you when your enemies will barricade you and surround you and hem you in on every side. They will level you to the ground, you and your children within the walls. They will not leave one stone on another. Why? Because you did not recognize the time of your visitation from God. That's Luke 19:41 to 44. For their rejection, judgment was indeed coming. Jesus wept over the city, knowing what was about to happen in the next few days. So, Holy Week thus begins with Jesus Christ the King entering into Jerusalem and proclaiming himself to be king. First time he's publicly done this, while the crowd shouted praises. Many of them, a few days later, would be the ones that would shout, "Crucify." So, this briefly sums up what took place on Palm Sunday and the triumphal entry. And in our next few episodes, we'll explain other events of Holy Week, leading, of course, to the crucifixion and then ultimately to the resurrection on Easter Sunday. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. Until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.